Hi everyone! So today I wanted to do a little kind of fall favorites video for you guys since we are heading towards the end of fall and there are a lot of plants in my collection that I have just really been admiring a lot this fall. And part of the reason I've been admiring some of these so much is because they actually have kind of picked up a little bit in growth during the fall, and I will explain why as we go along today. But this is going to be a little bit of a houseplant show and tell, so where possible I'm also going to throw up pictures of these plants from further back when they weren't as big yet or as full, and so you'll be able to see a little bit of a then versus now as well. But I wanted to start out with two plants that I now have officially had for 1 year, and I wanted to take a look at kind of what kind of growth we've seen over the course of that 1 year. And the first one I want to start with is actually my Monstera deliciosa that is sitting here behind me. Now obviously this plant is rather large, so you're not going to be able to see it fully from just sitting here with me, but as you can see from this point of view, we have gotten rather large. We are constantly putting out these new leaves. We still have some new leaves coming in unfenestrated, but I am starting to see more and more fenestrations on the kind of more mature, longer vines as the new leaves are starting to come in. Looking absolutely beautiful though. I absolutely love it. Now, one of you guys had asked me at one point how many vines were in this pot. I think there are 9. I will recount again after this video, but I'm pretty sure it's 9. They're so compact, like growth in there, that's kind of hard to count and make sure that you haven't double counted vines, if you know what I mean. But yes, lots of vines in there. That is part of the reason that it looks so full, and I absolutely love it. Now, at a certain point, that many vines might become a bit of a problem as this plant matures. And if that does become the case, then I will propagate this plant, kind of break it up, and then probably sell it or gift it to friends or whatever it may be. But right now I'm absolutely loving how it's looking. So like I said, I have had this for 1 year. My experience has been great in that 1 year. We haven't stopped growing at all, even throughout last winter. Obviously we kept growing throughout the summer, and we're still growing and putting out new growth now. I have repotted it once back in the spring, but absolutely love this plant. I have found it to be super easy to care for. I can't recommend it enough, assuming that you actually have space for it, that is, because once again, I mean, it's not exactly small right now, but it's gonna get much, much bigger, but totally impressed with this plant. But the second plant that I have officially had for 1 year, and actually I bought this plant at the same time that I bought my Monstera. I got both of them at one of my local Lowe's for super cheap, by the way. I think this one was only $24.99. And I'm pretty sure the next one we're about to look at was like $12.99 maybe, or maybe $14.99, somewhere around there, but super cheap. Another very big plant, and that is my Thaumatophyllum bipinnatifidum. I think I said it right this time. If I didn't, I will flash it on screen for you guys again. But this is what formerly was known as a split leaf philodendron. But once again, this is a very large plant, so we're going to be looking at it where it lives in my office. And before we go too far into looking at this plant, I do want to mention that this is a very kind of unruly type plant, and if anybody else has owned one, you may have experienced this, especially when they get to the size of the one that I have, that those leaves and the petioles just kind of want to twist and go crazy all over the place. So I have had to use supports, various support structures and methods to try to keep this one upright, but it still kind of just wants to do whatever it wants to do, and I just kind of let it do it because I think it's beautiful. But as you can see, those giant toothed leaves, we have gotten so many more new leaves since I got this plant. You can see some of the new ones here that have come in. We really have not stopped growing. We definitely picked up our growth rate during the spring and summer, but we're still putting out new growth now. And just look at the difference between when I got this plant and how many leaves were on it versus now. And I actually had to remove 2 of the oldest leaves last week, so it would have looked even fuller, but those are the first 2 leaves that this plant has ever lost in the entire year that I've owned it. And just so you guys know, I have never lost a leaf off of this Monstera in the entire year that I've owned it. This is all the original growth plus the new growth. But let's go ahead and take a look at the last large-ish plant first, because that's going to be the hardest one to get up here, but I think I can get this one on screen. Let me grab it real quick. Well, I said that, you guys, but now I'm kind of looking at it and I'm not sure how well we're going to go on screen, but I guess it's not too bad. But this is my Raven ZZ plant, and I believe the last time that you saw this, it had started to get 2 new branches coming in, and of course they come in that bright green, but they have now turned into that nice deep raven color. They're not entirely done changing color yet, but here's one of them. And just look how long and beautiful that new branch is. And you can see the leaves are definitely looking darker, but if You can see down here, we still have some green on the stem. Eventually that will become darker as well. Now over here, right here, is the other new one that came in, looking beautiful as well. Let me rotate this guy around here so we can see it from this angle. I'm just in awe of how much taller those two branches are that came in. Those are the tallest ones that you're seeing there. How tall they are compared to the rest. Absolutely loving it. And I'm hoping that we will still continue to get some new growth throughout the winter, because these two new branches, you guys, actually didn't come in until like really kind of right at the start of fall, like end of summer, start of fall. So I'm hoping we will continue to get some additional growth as well, but super excited about this plant, super excited how it's looking now compared to when I got it, and just can't wait to see what happens during the rest of the fall season. But let me get him set back aside and we'll look at our next plant. Okay, so our next few plants, and actually our next, let me see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Our next 6 plants that we're gonna look at have all been putting out even more growth during the fall than they really did during the spring and the summer, and there is a reason for that. So all of these plants that we're about to look at, the next 6 anyways, all of these are living directly in, or maybe only like a foot away from my southern facing windows, either in my bedroom or in my living room. And as I've mentioned to you guys many times before, during the spring and summer, direct light was not coming in through those windows. Now those windows were still getting more light than any of the other windows in my house, but we just weren't getting direct light. And a lot of these plants I'm about to show you really like that direct light. So now that we are getting direct light for longer during the fall, more and more and more, we're getting it for longer and longer and longer, these plants have really started to take off. So these are plants that I quite frequently will see get more growth on them during the fall and winter than I might during the entire spring and summer. And so let's go ahead and start with one of my Hoyas. And I want to start with this one because I've heard so many people say that the Hoya Wayetii is notoriously slow growing. I am actually seeing so much new growth on this plant. I just want to put that myth to bed right now. If you have this plant in the correct light, if you're giving it the correct conditions, if it's in the right type of soil, if you're watering it correctly, there is no reason that this plant should be any more slow growing than any of your other Hoyas. Now, I have not had this plant even for a year yet. I believe it will be 1 year in January, early January. And let's go ahead and look at what this plant looked like when I first got it versus now. And it's kind of flopping around in its cover pot because it's in kind of, it's much smaller pot. So let me take it out so I can hold it a little more still for you guys to see. But definitely has gotten more growth on this plant. Like this vine right here is really starting to take off. We're getting a lot of new growth on that one. But up here, we got new growth going on up here. We've got new growth going on over here, just pretty much everywhere on this plant. Now, this is the side that has been facing the window, so that's why I think we're looking a little bit more full over here, but I'm trying to be mindful to rotate so that we can get evenly full all around. And this plant is still small enough that it can just sit in its cover pot on one of the shelves in my window, but eventually I'm either gonna have to elevate this or I'm gonna have to turn this into a hanging plant so that it can really fully trail and look its best. Now, this plant has also been handling that direct light very well. All of the kind of pinkish tones that you're seeing on here are really just from the new leaves coming in, that slightly pinker color. It's not really getting sun stressed or anything like that, which is great. It seems to be absolutely loving that level of light. So I'm expecting to see continued growth like this throughout the fall and probably even throughout the winter as well. But let's take a look at our next plant. And let's see, I think before we move on to the other Hoyas, because I don't want to just bombard you with all the Hoyas at once, I want to take a look at my Parallel Peperomia, my Peperomia puteolata tetragona, because look at this. Look how crazy this plant is getting. So if you guys will recall, or if you are new here, first of all, welcome. But if you are new here, you may not have seen my video where I rearranged my plants when we moved into fall. And so this plant got relocated from my kitchen window, which is a west-facing window, into the southern windows behind my couch. I wasn't totally sure how it was going to do back there, but obviously, I mean, can you guys see this? This is all new growth since we put it back there. I will flash up what this plant looked like when I first got it, which was during the summer, I believe. But definitely this plant has taken off even more since I moved it into that southern facing window. And you guys, I'm also seeing a shorter distance between the growth points since I moved it into that southern facing window. So I do think this plant was starting to stretch out and get a little bit leggy in that west facing window because it probably just wasn't getting quite enough light compared to what it really wanted. And so that's why we started to get atoliated, which, by the way, I don't know if I've ever used that word with you guys before, but atoliated is just the scientific term for when the growth points, like the space between each growth points, gets longer and longer due to not really enough light, or not even not enough light, you guys. It's really just like, it's still enough light. It was putting out growth and everything it's doing fine, but if it got more light, it wouldn't stretch out quite as much. So that's usually a sign, if you're getting those longer spaces, that the plant would prefer more light. Doesn't mean that, you know, where you have it's horrible, but in the plant's opinion, it could be a little bit better, if you know what I mean. Now, quick reminder that this is actually a trailing plant. I don't know how long it's going to take for this tall one here to start trailing, but I mean, seriously, I don't feel like it can get much taller than that and not start to kind of flop over and trail. But just imagine, you guys, like once all of this kind of fills in, and there are some other growth points starting down here in the soil as well, once it fills in and it starts to trail over, I think it's going to look absolutely beautiful, and I'm just super excited about it. I'm in love with this plant. I'm loving this plant. I'm so glad I bought this plant. Highly recommend it. It actually has been one of the easiest peperomias I have owned as well. So definitely, if you have an opportunity to get one, I would highly recommend it. But I'm going to set this guy back aside and let's take a look at another Hoya. And so the next Hoya I want to look at is actually my Hoya curtisii. And this has perhaps been the fastest growing Hoya for me. And I did get this back in January as well. I got it, I think, at the same time that I got the Hoya Wayetii. And this one has definitely put out more growth even than the Wayetii for me. And this one has been living on the shelves above my couch in my living room. So it's about 2 feet back from the southern facing windows, but I'm starting to see even more growth being pumped out right now. And I think it's because, once again, it's now starting to get direct light, which it wasn't getting before. And I'm gonna try to show you guys, I'm gonna be honest, if I try to hold this up to the camera like this, it's just gonna focus on my face. So we're gonna splice in a little bit of footage here for you to see what I'm talking about. But a lot of Hoyas have those woody branches that we associate with Hoyas, the brown woody branches. But on the curtisii, that new growth comes in very green. So as you can see here, super green growth down here at the bottom. But if we track back up this vine, look how far up here we have to go before we get to the brown woody stem. That means that everything below that is all relatively new growth, because it's going to take a little while, but not too crazy long, once those green vines come in, for them to start to turn into that brown woody vine. So that's how much new growth is on this branch. That's a lot. From where I'm pinching all the way down to there, it's putting out a ton more new growth even at the bottom here as we speak. And that's pretty much what I'm seeing for the most part all the way around this plant. Now, once again, I've not been the best person about rotating this plant. So definitely on this side, we're seeing all of this new growth. Backside, not quite so much, but there are a few spots up in here that I'm seeing that are definitely starting to pump out some new growth as well. I have also seen some new growth sprouting up directly from the soil as well. And ooh, let me see if I can get this up here. There's a new branch sprouting off of an old branch right here. Let me see if you guys can see that. Well, I don't know if it'll focus because it's pretty small. Right there, there is a little bitty bud. So that is about to be a new branch sprouting off of there. And that is one of the things that I have really liked about this plant, and one of the other plants we're going to look at here in a bit, is that they don't really bald. I've talked about how to fix balding plants, and that if you don't get light on the top, that they can go bald. And that is true. This plant is getting light directly on the surface. But one of the things I like about this plant is that it will kind of start to just sprout off new vines and fill in the top just kind of on its own, which you don't see that with like a lot of trailing plants. So that is definitely a plus when it comes to the curtisii. But I am absolutely loving the amount of growth I am seeing on here. I am just in awe. I think it looks great. We obviously are okay with the level of light. We're not looking sun stressed. We don't have any kind of reddish coloring or maroonish coloring on these leaves that you would see if it was getting a lot of sun and getting sun stressed, and then, you know, to the point where you might need to worry that it's too much sun. It seems to be perfectly happy. And so once again, I can't wait to see how much more growth we get during the fall and the winter while we're getting all that direct sun. But the next Hoya I want to take a look at is my beautiful variegated Hoya carnosa compacta. This is my most recent wish list plant purchase that you guys have seen. And I absolutely am in love with this plant, but some interesting discoveries were made since the last time I think you guys saw this plant, so we'll get into that here in a second. But originally, after acclimating this plant to my house, I did have it living on one of the shelves behind my couch, directly in my southern facing windows in my living room, and it was doing fine there, you guys, honestly. And then I made a little bit of a discovery. I actually discovered first 2 mealybugs on my chain of hearts, which is hanging above that shelf. And that kind of got me a little bit nervous. I was like, okay, did the chain of hearts have the mealybugs, or did some other plant on this shelf have the mealybugs and then they got on the chain of hearts? So immediately I checked this one, because this is not a plant you want to have any kind of pests on, because there are just so many crevices for them to hide in. So I started taking a closer look at this plant and I found mealybugs on it. And if I'm being honest with you, I think they were probably on this plant first and then got onto the chain of hearts. And so immediately I isolated the plant. I actually moved it into my southeast facing window in my bedroom, just directly on the windowsill, because there were no other plants anywhere nearby for potential mealies that I didn't get off of it to crawl onto it. I am pretty sure that I have gotten rid of them. I really think there were only a few on there, and I just caught it so quickly that I was able to just use a Q-tip with some rubbing alcohol on it and kill those ones off. I did give it a full spray down with my pest spray, of course, just to be on the safe side, but I really, fingers crossed, have seen no more activity of mealybugs on here, which is definitely great, and it is pumping out so much new growth. I feel like on that new growth, if there were still mealybugs, I would see them, because they tend to go after the new growth versus the old growth. So I think we've eradicated that problem. Now, I have not moved it back into the living room, because honestly, it's pumping out a ton of new growth where it is in my bedroom, especially now that it's getting that direct light. So let's take a closer look here, and I do want to show y'all, what do I want to show you first? Let's show you this right here. So as you can see here, where all this lighter colored leafage is coming in here, this is new growth that's coming out off of this vine here. Now, of course, we do have our one super long vine, and we are getting new growth on this vine as well. If you can see right there, if it will focus, there it goes. But we're not getting as much growth on this vine, because this is actually hanging below the windowsill. So this is not getting direct light where the new growth is coming in. This up here is, and so that's why I think we're seeing more new growth up here. But look at these 2 vines over here. This is all just sprouted up in like the last week. So let me see if I can get them held up here and block my face so that you guys can see it if it'll focus. But you see that right there, all that new growth coming in there, and then that new growth coming in there. And so on this plant, it definitely does what most Hoyas do. On the curtisii, I don't really, the growth happens so quickly on the curtisii that I don't really see like bare stems like this. But this is what happens on most Hoyas, is it comes in like this, it looks like a bare stem, and then the leaves start to develop on it. So if you can see on this side here, you can see where that tiny little new leaf is starting to come in over here. That will keep happening on all of the nodes on this branch as it pushes out. And most of the time on these plants, that growth will come in that kind of more white and pinkish type color, and then it will turn greener over time. But this, like I said, you guys, this shocked me. This has popped up in the course of like a week. And so if that's what I have to look forward to with this plant during the fall and winter, I'm super excited about that. That means by spring, we'll probably actually have full trailing around this plant and not just the one long vine. But another thing that happened after the last time you guys saw this plant. So I did repot this right when I got it, and I didn't really repot it. So let me explain what I mean. Let me take her out of her cover pot 1 second. And once again, you guys, I don't know why some of my plants are he's or she's, and sometimes, you know what, I change it up every now and again. It's just, I don't know. There's no conscious decision as to whether it's gonna be male or female. It just happens. But here's what I did when I got this plant. I didn't want to leave it in its opaque pot for 2 reasons. 1, this plant was not cheap. 2, I have never owned one of these before, so I wanted to be able to keep an eye on the roots. So I took it out of its opaque pot and I put it into a clear pot. I didn't really like change the soil or anything like that. It was pretty much I just take it out of that pot, put it into this pot so I could keep an eye on the roots. Now at the time I did that, the roots looked a little bit odd to me, and I had a hunch that this plant might have been severely underwatered, almost to the point of not being able to recover, and I'm pretty sure I was right about that. So let me see if I can get this up on screen for you. If not, I'll flash in some separate footage because there might be a glare on the pot. But if you can see up at the top here, there's what looks like dried old roots. Those are the roots that were in this plant when I bought the plant. They are definitely dead. Now, if you look further down, you can see some new roots coming in. I'm pretty sure this is all new root growth that the plant basically put out after I repotted it and started like watering it correctly, because apparently it wasn't getting watered correctly before, to try and save itself. Now, part of the reason I think this as well is because I did start to lose a lot of leaves shortly after I got it into my home. And I think that was because most of the roots were dead and it was trying to produce brand new roots to survive. Now, clearly it is doing that. It is doing it pretty well. I'm seeing them kind of now all the way around the pot. And now that we are putting out new growth, that's a good sign that the roots are like reestablishing themselves. But just the fact that I can see those dry old roots in there pretty much tells me that, yeah, somebody severely underwatered this plant. I'm lucky that those roots didn't rot and cause a rot problem in here. I think that's because this is a very chunky soil, which is the type of soil that this plant really needs. But we have still lost a few more. Even last week, I think we lost 2 of our older leaves that were slightly damaged. But all in all, I mean, we still look great, right? Don't you guys think she looks great? I think she looks great. So yeah, it was just kind of an interesting situation, and I'm just glad that the plant has recovered and figured out, you know, where there's a will, there's a way with your plants, you guys. This plant obviously had the will to survive, and it started to produce new roots to sustain itself, and it has done them relatively quickly for a Hoya. So super impressed with this plant. Can't wait to show this again to you in the spring. But that's our last Hoya that I wanted to look at. So let me set her back aside and I will grab our next plant. Okay, so the next plant I want to take a look at is actually my Epipremnum pearls and jade, Epipremnum aureum pearls and jade, I should say. Now, I have told you guys that we had started to put out a bunch more growth since I moved it into my bedroom, and it was on my nightstand by my east-facing window. I have recently relocated it again because Rosie was on the other nightstand, which is closer to the southern-facing windows, and she was getting a little bit unhappy with the amount of light she was getting there. So I just swapped them, right? So we are now getting even more light. My biggest concern has been, am I gonna see burning on the white parts of the leaves? You will see some kind of what looks like burning on the white part of the leaves on this plant, but that was already there from the other window, and I'm not really seeing an increase in any of it. So I think we're far enough back from the southern facing windows that it's not like it's not causing new burn basically. But I have seen a ton of new growth, and it's about time on this plant. So let's take a look at what this plant looked like when I first got it. This plant just sat there, I've told you guys before, doing nothing forever, but we now actually have a vine that is trailing. Look at that right there. That vine is trailing. I can't believe it. Finally something is trailing. Now, as it always goes with these plants, and I think I've mentioned this to you recently, that they will start to trail one vine and that one will get crazy long and the rest of them will just be sitting there. It's just how it seems to go. But I'm just super happy that it is trailing. Now, I am getting slightly concerned because I have seen 2 stuck leaves on this plant in the last week. If you can see there, that one's stuck and it's not really, it's not loose enough for me to try to help it out yet. So that's why I haven't done that. That is concerning to me. However, like I said, it's been in the last 2 weeks and we got really cold earlier than normal here this year. And so my humidity had dropped down to like high 20s, low 30s. And that seems to be something that can cause stuck leaves. Now, we are in a very rainy week and it's like 51% humidity in here. So hopefully that will help resolve the situation. But some of you commented when I shared in a recent video how I get leaves unstuck. Some of you guys had said that try misting them before you try to help them get unstuck, that it helps. I think that's a really good tip. So I actually tried that on the last leaf on this plant that I needed to help get unstuck, and it really did seem to help. So definitely something that I recommend you guys try if you are trying to gently unstick leaves like this on any of your plants. Just give them a slight mist with some water, and I guess it kind of like helps like lubricate them to kind of come out more easily without potentially getting damaged. But one other thing I wanted to show you on this plant was what is happening from where we had trimmed off the one vine a while back that was starting to produce all green leaves. So let me show you where we cut that one off. So it's right here. Hopefully you guys can see. Right there is where we cut that off, and above that we had one solid green leaf. It is this leaf over here. And then we also had, let me figure out what was right above this. Oh, I just noticed something interesting, you guys. Okay, I'll show you that in a second too. So this was the other leaf that was already on that vine right above where we cut. And this happens sometimes, you guys, and I really did not even notice this until right now, but every now and again, when you cut a vining plant, such as an Epipremnum or a philodendron or a Syndapsus even, when you do that, you normally will get one new growth point coming off of where you cut. So we did get a new growth point coming off right here from where we cut, but sometimes you can get lucky and you get two growth points coming off, and that happened. So right here is the other new growth point that is coming in. So now we actually turned one vine into two vines, and it's always a happy accident. It doesn't happen very often in my experience. I mean, if any of you guys have different experience, comment down below and let us know. But when it does, it's super exciting because it's going to make your plant look fuller and you didn't have to like propagate back in the top or anything like that. So definitely that's, you know, a plus, a win-win right there. But let's look at what the new growth is looking like in terms of variegation. So where we grew right off from where we cut, we now have 1, 2, 3, 4 new leaves here. Now what I am seeing, here are the 4 right here, if it will focus again. So these 4, so what I'm seeing is I've got green leaves, solid green leaves, and then we have 2 over here that have some variegation on them. And the good news is this is the newest of the 2 that have variegation, and it has more variegation than the last. So that's what we want to see. Now, this is all solid green because if I look at the stems on this plant, the variegation right now, I'm seeing more variegation on one side of the stem than the other. So the side where the all green leaves are coming out is the side that has less variegation. But since it is starting to pick up, and since this plant is now getting pretty much direct light, even though it's like way far back from those windows, I think we will see that variegation continue to pick up. Now let's see what happened on the other growth point, because that other growth point, that came in one node above where we had previously cut. So we might actually have all variegated leaves coming from that node. And it looks like we do because it was on the side of the leaf that had variegation. So that one leaf that I had told you guys still had variegation on it. Let me find it again. So this leaf right here that still had variegation on it, that other growth point came out directly after this one. And so we've gotten 2 leaves on that growth point. And they aren't super variegated, but they are both variegated. So here is one here, and you can see it's just got a little bit of variegation going on it. But then we've got this little baby one over here, if I can get it spinned around, and it has a little bit more variegation on it. So definitely an improvement. I'm feeling pretty confident that we're gonna get more variegated. We're not gonna keep pushing out solid green leaves. We may push out like a couple more on that one side of that one vine. But if it is still doing that, and it, you know, if it's frustrating me or whatever, then I will make another chop. But I kind of don't want to, because I would have to chop further back from the 2 new growth points. And we got 2 new growth points, which to me is more exciting. So I'll probably just let it be. But super impressed with this plant now. It is starting to grow on me more and more, like both literally and figuratively, if you know what I mean. But yeah, I'm super excited about this. I know some of you guys had told me in the past that you were having completely different experiences than I was with this one, and that it was really taking off. So hopefully I am now moving into having that same experience as well. But let me set this plant back aside and we will look at our next plant. All right, you guys, so the next plant I want to take a look at is actually my ever so beautiful Cyclamen. And the reason I wanted to take a look at this plant with you guys today is because, as I have mentioned before, this is one of those plants that is kind of the reverse of what you expect plants to be. This plant does not grow more in the spring and summer. It actually grows more in the fall and winter. And so I am starting to see a huge uptick in growth on this plant. It is still living in my west-facing window in my kitchen, right above my kitchen sink. It is happy there. It has always been happy there. I have no reason to move it anywhere else. His cover pot's kind of heavy, so let me take him out of there real quick. But in addition to seeing all of this extra new leaf growth coming in, we are also starting to put out even more of these beautiful flowers. I love the flowers on this plant, you guys. And you can get these in different colors. Like you can get ones with pink flowers, but I just love white and green together. But they're just so cute. They almost don't even look real. And we did maintain flowers throughout the spring and summer as well, but we didn't have as many as we do now. And I am going to, I don't think I'm gonna be able to hold it up well enough to the camera, but I'll flash in some footage once again so you can see just how many additional flowers are starting to come in on this plant as well that just haven't opened yet. So here in the next week, this is probably going to look even more beautiful in terms of how much flower activity we have going on. Now, the leaves are also starting to get bigger. So I have had this plant. I had it for 1 year. It was in October, early October, I believe, maybe late October. But so it's been about a year that I've had this plant, a year and a month, if you will. And so we are now starting to move into getting much larger leaves as well. So once again, I'll flash up on screen so you guys can see what it looked like when I first got it. It's probably going to be hard to tell because I don't think I have a picture from like directly above it from back then, but I'm going to tilt this so you can see like how wide this plant has gotten. Definitely has gotten wider, and definitely we are getting much bigger leaves. So look at the size of that leaf right there compared to, for example, let me find one of the older ones. Let's see if we can, oh, there's one that's kind of older, so you can see that is a much smaller leaf compared to like these new leaves that are coming in that are so big. And I love the variegation on this plant as well. That green on green variegation is so beautiful. So this plant will once again continue to put out tons of new growth. I know it will because it's growing season, and so I can't wait to see kind of how big we get this year. But let me set this plant back aside and we will take a look at our next and final plant. Okay guys, so I wanted to bring out my Peperomia prostrata, aka string of turtles, next because I feel like it has been a while since we've looked at this plant. I absolutely adore this plant. And this plant is doing something right now that I haven't really talked to you guys about before. And I feel like a lot of people see this happening on their string of turtles and they kind of freak out and think it's something that it isn't. So here she is, first of all, looking beautiful. I probably need to give her a haircut soon. It's been a hot minute since she's had a haircut, but she is still living in the east-facing window in my bedroom. Absolutely loves it there. But you may notice that we have some yellowing leaves. So let's talk about what causes yellowing leaves like you are seeing there on your Peperomia prostratus. So a couple things. If you aren't watering often enough, you can start to see leaves like that. If that is what is causing it, typically the leaves will feel a little bit squishy because this is a very succulent-like plant. So if those leaves are looking yellow and feeling squishy, there's a good possibility, and you haven't watered it in a while, of course, there's a good possibility that you've just gone too long without watering it. Now, in my experience, these plants also really do appreciate being fed fairly frequently. So I definitely don't go more than a month between fertilizing this plant, because if you are having a nutrient deficiency, that can also present as these kind of yellowing leaves. However, if you know you're not underwatering or overwatering your Peperomia prostrata, and you know that you're getting the fertilization right and you're still starting to see yellowing leaves and you're wondering what the heck is going on, just a quick reminder, you guys, that all plants naturally lose leaves over time. The thing is, I think we are so used to seeing how it happens on thinner leafed plants such as your philodendrons, Epipremnums, that type of plant, that we forget what it looks like on succulent type plants. And it can present in many different ways, but this kind of yellowing that you're seeing here, this is just natural leaf loss, you guys. This is the oldest vines. These are the one, and I know they're the oldest because they're like the biggest leaves. If you can see here, like how big those leaves are. I swear this camera just wants to focus on my face. You see how big those leaves are compared to the ones around it? That's because those are the oldest leaves, the oldest vines. And sometimes the whole vine will go yellow and you'll have to cut it off, which I did do a couple of weeks ago for some of the vines on here. But the nice thing, once again, kind of like I talked about with that curtisii, the nice thing on this plant is that it just pushes out new vines up out of the top of those old vines to replace them, basically. So that's what's happening on this plant. We're going through a period where we're getting rid of some of our older leaves, our older vines. But if you can see here, I'm going to try and tilt this forward without dropping anything. If you can see up on top, you can see where all of these new vines are starting to pop up out of that soil. Like the one that's sticking up right here, that's a new vine. And so we don't look bald at all. We are getting light on the surface of us at all times. But even then, as these yellower leaves fall off, it is just pushing in new vines after new vines. So absolutely love how that happens with this plant. I think it is an absolutely gorgeous plant. We definitely need a haircut. We're getting way too long. And another thing, you guys, when you do start to see this, what I will do, and I did do this last week, I will go cut off any flowers that are on this plant to help encourage it to produce the new foliage and not just focus on the flowers. So that definitely helps. I'm definitely seeing these new vines come in a lot quicker since I cut those flowers off. But definitely impressed with this plant. We grew a lot last fall and winter, so I'm expecting to see pretty much the same thing happen this year as well. But hopefully you guys have enjoyed coming along with me today and looking at all of my fall favorites, and hopefully maybe even learned a thing or two along the way. If so, please be sure to click that like and or subscribe button down below, and I look forward to seeing you guys again next time. Aloha!